Well, shalom, dear friends, and welcome to our Genesis Bible study. In this video series of Bible studies that we are doing today, we will be in chapter 33. It's kind of a short little chapter, and it's obviously a follow-up to chapter 32. And we'll talk a little bit about the chronology of what we'll be studying today in the context of my preliminary PowerPoint stuff. I didn't make any changes to the PowerPoint from the last chapter, chapter 32. So if you don't want to go through that again, I encourage you just to hit fast forward until we come to the word processor, not word processor stuff, the Bible study software material. And that's where we will take up the verse by verse study of this chapter of Genesis. But I do want to provide the background material for those who may not be watching this video series in chronological order. So you decide what you want to do. If you want to do the background material, we will jump into that right now. So first thing, I have been advertising recently in the last couple of months. My latest book called Nazarene Essene Theology was made available for purchase. My books, I think this is the seventh book that I've written. They're basically commentaries on books of the Bible and also historical stuff. Nazarene Essene Theology, though, was kind of a monumental effort. It's a systematic theology, basically from Genesis to Revelation of the whole Bible, kind of in summary, in an orderly fashion, like systematic theologies do. And there's a tremendous amount of material in this book based on the book of Genesis. So you might find this book helpful as we study the book of Genesis. We've also been looking at a dispensational chart from a book of charts by a scholar named Alfred Eade. He has passed away a while back, and his family still runs a publishing company that produces those books of charts. I have lots of dispensational charts, and Eade's charts are my all-time favorite. I do have written permission from the family and the publishers to use his material in my Bible studies. And when I was pastoring a church, we used it for Bible studies there as well. So we use Eade's charts. This particular chart is of the dispensation of promise, or the historical era, where promise was the promises of God were kind of the primary focus of this dispensation. And I always feel like I have to explain that God has been making promises in the Bible ever since the Garden of Eden. And he continues to do so throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament and into the eternal future. God is a God who makes promises and keeps them. But I think as you can tell by our studies, the topic of God's promises it really is the focus of this period of history. It's also known as the time of the patriarchs, and the patriarchs are here on the chart. Avram, whose name was changed to Avraham, Yitzhak, who kept his name, didn't have a name change. And then we have Yaakov, is the third generation of the patriarchs, and his name I think it was just the last chapter we studied, chapter 32, his name is changed by God to Israel, which means, it does mean a prince, uh, a prince with God. And but more than that, it means a victorious prince, a conquering prince, a prince who wins his battles. So yeah, so from now on, Genesis is going to refer to him alternately as Yaakov and Israel. Yaakov when he's not being so spiritual, and Israel when he's being very spiritual. In the last number of chapters that we have studied, we learned that through his two wives and two concubines, Yaakov Israel became the father of 12 sons, each of which would be kind of the founders, the patriarchs, the ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel. But at this point, they're all living as individuals, although some of the older ones, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, and so forth, may have already started families on their own. In all of these charts, we track the red ribbon or the red road of salvation all the way through until the cross of Yeshua, Jesus Christ, who is the Redeemer. He is the Savior of the world. And so the red line goes through Abraham, Yitzhak, and Israel because the Messiah would come from this family tree. And it runs through Yehuda, Judah, who is not the oldest nor the youngest, but he is the family that God chose for a variety of reasons that we will encounter in our studies in the future. Judah will be the tribe that will produce the kings of Israel. Tribe of Levi will produce the priests and their assistants, just known as the Levites. We will also spend a lot of time studying the life experiences of Yosef, the second to youngest of the 12 sons of Yaakov, because in many ways he is a type of the Messiah, a type of Yeshua, and we'll talk about those ways when we get to it. Of course, eventually this family ends up in Egypt during a time of famine, and that is because, well, there are a number of reasons for that, but one of the most significant reasons is all of these brothers hated Joseph because he was his father's favorite. And so they hated him so much. And in a way, Yosef kind of invited their hatred. But they thought first to kill him, and then they decided that they didn't want blood on their hands. So they sold him into slavery in Egypt. And because God was with him, we will see that Yosef is going to rise to power in Egypt, and he will end up saving the lives of not only the Egyptians, but also the Canaanites, where his family was living. And during that time of famine, they have to come down to Egypt to buy food, and they encounter their brother. And that story will be told in a very interesting fashion in the later chapters of Genesis. So this is the period of time that we are looking at. We've also been looking at some maps. The first couple of maps involve the travels of Abraham and Sarah when they came from Ur of the Chassidim, which seems to be the birthplace of the patriarchs. The whole family moves up here to a place called Haran, where Terah, the patriarch of this family, passes away. And then Abraham and Sarah feel free to move south into the promised land. Haran in modern day Syria, or Aram, it's called in the biblical era, was not the promised land. Well, in fact, it is the promised land, but it's not what we know of in modern times as the promised land. The modern day state of Israel is just this little tiny sliver right here, this part. And so the modern state of Israel in no way even comes close to reaching the boundaries that God has laid out for the promised land. And in these two Bible passages, Genesis 13 and Genesis 15, we learned that the promised land consists within the boundaries of the places where the patriarchs' feet would walk and their eyes would behold the land that God was giving to them and to their family forever. So this is the initial journey of Abraham and Sarah to the promised land. Then we have a map that shows a time that they went over to Egypt and spent some time there because of famine in the land, once again. So this brings the western boundary to the river of Egypt. Here it is, the Nile. And So even from these early chapters of Genesis, we see I guess it would be the geographical or the political boundaries from the river of Egypt on the west to the great river Euphrates on the east. So it's a huge parcel of land. Lately, we've been looking at this map, which shows the travels of, let me pull my picture out of the way, the travels of Jacob. And it shows his travels here around the land where he was born, the land of Canaan. But then it shows him going up to Haran to stay with the extended family for a while for reasons that we discussed. He wasn't getting along well with his brother Esau. And then he comes back after 20 years in Haran, getting married there to two women and having children by them and by two maidservants in the household. He comes back, and the journey back is what we have covered in the last couple of studies, chapter studies. So we're looking at just an expanded, a larger scale map here. Some of the key places that we've talked about are Mizpah, where Laban, his father-in-law, overtook him. He kind of sneaked away, and so Laban had to chase after him. And they part company on less than ideal terms, but at least they're not at war with each other. And so Jacob moves the family down here to Penuel. I think it wasn't called that initially until Yaakov was renamed Israel after having a wrestling match with God. Interesting thing about this, we talked about the name Israel, that it does have to do with the term prince, a prince of God, but it has to do with a victorious prince. And so Jacob ends up wrestling, or right towards the end of chapter 32, he ends up wrestling with a guy who turns out to be God. I think it was probably Yeshua that he was wrestling with. And basically, God wins the wrestling match, but Yaakov wins the blessing. So Jacob's hip was put out of joint in this wrestling match. And eventually, Jesus kind of turned loose of him, or God turned loose of him, but blessed him with this patriarchal blessing. The covenant blessing, the Abrahamic covenant, is passed on to Yaakov, and his name is changed to Israel. So even though he lost the wrestling match, he won, and his name reflects that, a victorious prince of God. I guess it's Yasar in Hebrew, also is related to the word for wrestling, or for pugilism. There we go. And I think that's just kind of a play on words. I mean, the significance of Yaakov's name is that he is a prince of God. So then he, in the last chapter, Yaakov sends his family members under the leadership of some servants in the household. He sends them across this is the Yavok River here. He sends them across the river, and he and his family kind of stay behind, but he arranges them in companies, anticipating that Esau might want to attack and kill them, especially when he finds out from his servants that Esau was coming to visit him with 400 armed men. So sounds like a battle's on the way. So Jacob kind of divides up the family so that if the first company that Esau encounters is going to be the families and the flocks and herds of the sons of the servant girls, and then Leah's going to come next, so she would be the next one to be attacked. Finally, Rachel is the one that he hopes will not be attacked because she's his favorite wife, and her son at that point is his favorite son. So then that's kind of where we left it off. The wrestling match is where we left off the story last time, and so we'll pick it up Today in chapter 33, on the next day following the the all-night wrestling match. Um, this material right here, we've been talking about that every time, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But in Genesis 25:27, Yaakov, Jacob, is called a mild man in English, and in Hebrew that's a Tam, T-A-M. And it really, and here's the dictionary definition of what that means. He's a complete man, usually morally pious, gentle, dear, coupled together, perfect, plain, undefiled, and upright. And when I first read that, I just had to laugh because I always thought of Jacob as being, the term I apply to him is he's a dirty rat. He's a conniver. He's a trickster. And the fact that God gives him this description or this characteristic of being a Tom has made me kind of rethink some of the incidents in that story. So we're going to continue that process today. In the chapter study for today, Yaakov is going to be talking to his brother Esau, and he's going to say something that doesn't appear to be completely true and might be deceptive or misleading. And so that would kind of fall under the dirty rat department, but I'm going to rethink that today. So we'll talk about that conversation when we get to it. And we'll see if you think that Yaakov is a Tom or a dirty rat. We have the family tree. It starts with Terah. His son was Abraham, and his daughter was Sarai. So these are brother and sister, but they're step siblings because the mother of these two is different. Abraham had a different mom than Sarah. And of course, those two eventually have the son of promise, that's Isaac. But before that, Abraham and Hagar, an Egyptian maidservant in the family, produce Ishmael, who will be the older brother of Isaac. And Ishmael is going to be banished from the house after he doesn't treat Isaac right. And he will be the ancestor of the Ishmaelites or the Arabs, the Aravim. So Isaac gets a wife named Rebecca from this extended family up in Haran. Her family tree is through Bethuel, her father, who is a brother to Abraham, and then is a what would that be, like a nephew to Abraham, and then Nahor is a brother. So Rivka and Abraham and Yitzhak come from two different branches of this family. And so Rivka is Isaac's wife. And then and they produce Yaakov and Esav, and Esav is going to become the ancestor of the Edomites. And these are two people groups that have, ever since biblical times, have been hostile towards the Jewish people and the nation of Israel, and continue to be so today. So when it comes time for Yaakov to get a wife, Esau's just been marrying the local Canaanite girls, and that doesn't make mom and dad very happy. So after Yaakov ends up in a less than happy relationship with his brother Esau, Isaac and Rivka think it's time for him to go back up to Haran and get a wife of his own. So he gets Rachel and Leah, whose dad is Lavan, who is a brother of Rivka, and back up to Bethuel, who is the father of both of them, through the line of Nahor. So that's the family tree. And here we have the four women in Yaakov's life. Rachel was his favorite. He was the one he fell in love with. He ended up marrying Leah first because he kind of got tricked there. And then Zilpah was Leah's servant, and Bilhah was Rachel's servant. And all four of them had kids. Rachel was the last to have kids because for the longest time she was barren, as was Sarah, as was Rebecca. and eventually God made it possible for them to bear children. So that's the family tree of Yaakov. These last three slides is material from the Dake Study Bible. Dake takes the position that Jacob took his wives immediately when he arrived in Haran, and I think he's absolutely right about that. But most people think like he had to work 7 years for Rachel, and then he got her at the end of the 7 years. I'm sorry, he worked for Rachel, but he got Leah. Then he had to work another 7 years before he got Rachel. So it was actually 14 years before he was able to marry Rachel. But that chronology doesn't work out, and Dake gives the explanation for that. I'm not going to read through this material because we've done that already. So if you want to read the material that's on this page, pause the video now and start reading until you're done, and then push play again. And okay, here is the second of the three frames, and I'll move my picture out of the way so you can see it. If you want to read through this page, pause, hit pause, read through the material, and then hit play again. And when you have done that, here is the third of the three pages. If you want to read it, hit pause. And when you're through reading it, then hit play again, and you'll be done. So with that, let us go to our text for today and enjoy God's holy word. Genesis 33:1. Now Yaakov lifted his eyes, and he looked, and there was Esau coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front, and Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Yosef last. Now Rachel's going to have another child, so she's going to survive, obviously. She's going to have another child named Benjamin, and we will come to that story. But Benjamin, has not yet been born at this point in the story. So he puts the whole family out in front of him in the order that we discussed in the preliminary material. And then he, Yaakov, crossed over before them. So he is going out in front now. And he is going to be the first one to encounter Esau, and probably fearing for his life at this point. So he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. And this bowing, bowing himself to the ground. Why can't I get that highlighted? Shechach, bowed. It's kind of related to the word for praise in the Bible. So anyway, it's just showing respect. I don't know what the equivalent would be nowadays. I guess, people still bow before royalty, don't they? So he's treating Esau with great respect, hoping Esau won't cut his head off. So verse 4, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Now, I can't explain this because the last time we encountered Esau, he was vowing to kill his brother. Now, he did say, he kind of mitigated that by saying, I'm going to wait till my dad dies, because my dad would be upset if I killed Yaakov. Mom probably would be too. So he's going to wait till his parents die, and then he's going to kill Yaakov. And he's had 20 years for this hatred and anger and desire for vengeance to just boil up inside him. And now he's going to have an opportunity to carry it out. But this doesn't seem to be the attitude he has. So sometimes, they say time heals all wounds. Maybe it healed his wounds. Maybe his life is going fine and he's happy, and he got tired of being angry at Yaakov, so he just decided he would get on with life. Maybe sometimes when two people are separate from each other and they're not constantly getting on each other's nerves, sometimes they can develop a fondness for each other. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, they say. So maybe that happened. Maybe God touched him. Maybe maybe Esav embraced the gospel and is loving the Lord his God with all his heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving his neighbor, in this case, Yaakov, his brother, as himself. I don't really know what's going on with Esav. One of the things that Dake kind of hints at a little bit here, bowing and greeting was an Arab custom. And I guess we could include Esav in the Arab community of nations. So, I mean, this is what you do when a stranger, when you encounter a stranger, you treat them with respect. But kissed him and they wept. And I'm thinking these are two, long separated brothers and they kind of love each other. And so this is kind of a beautiful scene. And I'm sure Yaakov is greatly relieved because last he heard, Esav wanted to kill him, and now he apparently doesn't. So, verse 5, and the he seems to be Esav. Esav lifted his eyes and he saw the women and the children. And he said, who are these with you? So he, and in this case, he is Yaakov, said, the children whom God has graciously given your servant. Now, it could be the other way around. It could be first that Yaakov is, and he sees the women and the children of Esav, but they're not mentioned in the text. So it could be either way. And I mean, either of those brothers could honestly say that any children that they have are a gift from God. So verse 6, then the maidservants came near, and they and their children, and bowed down. And Leah also came near with her children, and they bowed down. So all this respect. And afterward, Yosef and Rachel came near, and they bowed down. So everybody's bowing down and showing respect to each other, which is heartwarming. Then Esav said, what do you mean by all this company which I met? And he said, these are to find favor in the sight of my Lord. So he says he's already met them because remember, Yaakov sent them ahead of him across the Yabok River in the order that was described here. And the servants who were, leading those different groups were given specific instructions about what to say to Esav when they encountered him. And I believe they did encounter him. So, he's acknowledging that he's met these groups, but this is the first time he's met the immediate family of Yaakov. So Yaakov said, these are to find favor in the sight of my Lord. The word favor here is chen. And it is one of the words that is translated grace in the Old Testament. Here in the New King James Version, it's translated favor, which is kind of the same thing. The other Hebrew word that is more frequently used for the concept of grace is chesed. Actually, the word chen here in Hebrew literally means for nothing. If you ask someone to give you something without payment, that would be a chen request. Chen is a type of prayer, a prayer for grace, a prayer that God will give someone or yourself something that you want or need for nothing. Chen means for nothing. When Jesus is talking about being angry with your brother for no reason, in the Hebrew New Testament, chen is the word that is used there. So angry for no reason, like for no cause. So chen has that meaning of for nothing. So these are to find favor or chen, grace in the sight of my Lord. Now, two important words in the Bible that we all need to know what the words are and understand them. One is grace and the other is mercy. We've already talked about grace, which is chen or chesed. The other one is racham, which is mercy. And here's these two words are similar, but there is a like a subtle distinction. Grace is when you do get something that you don't deserve. Mercy is when you don't get what you do deserve. So when we approach God as sinners, especially when we approach God, we want to be asking for his mercy, because the wages of sin is death. So what we do deserve because of our sins is death. And we want God to be merciful and not give us what we do deserve. But then God shows how good he is by giving us things we don't deserve, like eternal life and forgiveness of sins and the indwelling Holy Spirit and spiritual gifts and friends who love us because they've been born again. And I mean, it just goes on and on. He gives us daily bread. He gives us financial resources. And I know you think that, you collected your own financial resources because, you've got a job, or, however you've earned your money. And there is truth to that. But ultimately, all of the world's what economy is run by God. All the money is God's. He doesn't have to give you any of it, but he's chosen to give it to us. And he's even established some ground rules about how we can, receive financial blessing. And the one guideline that runs all through the Bible, Old and New Testaments, although some will debate that tithing is not a New Testament precept. I believe it is. I believe it is. I mean, you can argue that it's not, but I think tithing is the basic rule, and giving of gifts and offerings over and above the tithe, and just being generous and things like that. Proving yourself a trustworthy conduit of God's financial resources. If you prove trustworthy, then God will entrust you with more financial resources. It's as simple as that. And a lot of people say, yes, God is a giving God, but he doesn't always give, finances. It's the one thing that people find it difficult to believe that God is going to give them. But I have been tithing and believing in tithing long enough, over 40 years, it'll be 44 years now. And God has just financially blessed our family in extraordinary, inexplicable ways. I currently am sitting on a small fortune, and just buying all kinds of things that I never thought I could own. And that is all to do with God's goodness and the associations we've had with friends and family members who are believers and who follow God's rules and regulations. And so God has provided for our families in extraordinary ways. So, yep, all these gifts, Yaakov is hoping to find favor and grace in the sight of my Lord. And here the word Lord, Adoni, is in the singular. And so Yaakov is talking about Esav as his Lord, kind of his master, his older brother whom he respects, um, as someone who has power and influence over him at this stage of his life. So that's Adoni, that's my Lord, and it is often used to address another human being. But when we have Adonai, and I'll try to remember to highlight that if we come across it in our text, but in in the case of Adonai, instead of a hirek here under the noon, the end sound, we would have a patach, which is like a plural idea. And then, so it would be a patach yod. That's a plural form of Adonai, and that is usually a reference to divinity, to the three persons of the Trinity. And also, it is the Adonai is the substitute word, or the circumlocution, I think is the technical term, for using a name other than Yod-He Vav-He or Yahweh. If you want to avoid pronouncing his name like I just did, because I want you to know how it should be pronounced, then you use a circumlocution, and the circumlocution is usually Adonai in the plural. But it's sometimes Elohim, which is the word for God, and it's also in the plural. So Elohim and Adonai are references to divinity in ordinary terms. But again, both of those terms can be used in the plural form with reference to other creatures, angels, and powerful and influential human beings. Okay, verse 9. But Esav said, I have enough. I have enough, my brother, Achi. Keep what you have for yourself. So this proves, as Dake points out, that God had blessed Esau, as predicted by Isaac. So why was Esau blessed? Because he was so smart, because he was so good and pious and holy? He may have been. But I believe it was because he is of the family of the patriarchs. He is a descendant of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. And God promised to bless those families whether they deserved it or not. So whether Esau deserved, kind of worked for and earned his fortune, his resources, or not, he has them. And that should not surprise us if we understand that God is a keeper of promises and covenants. Okay, verse 10. Yaakov said, no, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then receive my present from my hand, inasmuch as I have seen your face, as though I had seen the face of God, and you were pleased with me. The Hebrew word is tirtzeh. The root word is ratzah, resh, tzadi, and hey. In this case, it is in the plural. It would be what, pleasings, I guess. But the hay drops away for the plural, and then we have this. I believe it's a construct. Yeah. It's a Vav construct. I think it's a construct form, which basically means you would be pleased with me. The knee here on the end is a reference to Yaakov himself. You'd be pleased with me, Ratzon, pleased with me, that you would be favorable, that you would accept me is another way of looking at this. So yeah, you were pleased with me. So here we get a situation where Yaakov is willing to give Esav some or all of his wealth, I think in exchange for survival. Like if you'll let my family survive, it's worth anything and everything we own. That does not seem to be the attitude that Esav has. In fact, he says, God has blessed me, so why don't you keep your stuff? And now Yaakov is saying, no, I want to give it to you. It's the appropriate thing to do. So eventually he convinces Esav, please take my blessing that is brought to you because God has dealt graciously with me. God's made me rich because I've done finances his way. I've walked a life of faith, and because I have enough. So he urged him, and he took it. Now, Dake says here in his notes that the acceptance of a gift under such circumstances is a token and pledge of peace. Isn't that interesting? Absolute refusal would have indicated intentions of hostility and revenge. So Esav took it. Now, if Dake is right about that, it sheds light on the attitude of both of these guys. Jacob wants Esau to take his stuff because in taking his stuff, it would be completely inappropriate in the context of that community to ever, wreak any havoc on Jacob's life, to do any violence to him. So that's why he wants him to take it. Now, Esau resists initially, says, no, you keep it to yourself. And Yaakov might suspect that he doesn't want to take the gift because he wants to have his vengeance. He wants to kill Yaakov. So Yaakov may still be expecting that. So he presses him on it, please take it. And he does take it. So by taking it, it would be completely inappropriate. Everybody in the country would agree that for Esau to take his stuff, Jacob's stuff, and then attack him would be inappropriate. And, he would have been alienated, sanctions would have been placed on him and he wouldn't have done well. So he does take it, which may be an indication that he not never, but he recently, at this point in the story, he doesn't want to be hostile towards Yaakov or to punish him in any way. So verse 12, then Esau said, let us take our journey, let us go, and I will go before you. Now, I'm not sure where Esau wants to take them. It might be to where the extended family's, Canaanite headquarters was, like Beersheba or someplace like that. Or he might have wanted Yaakov to join him where he lives on Mount Seir in what we now call Saudi Arabia. But in those days, it was called Edom, the land of Edom. And we could say Esau is the king of Edom. And so he wants his brother to join with him. So he says, let's take our journey together. And I'll go before you, either to Mount Seir or to the family homestead. But Yaakov said to him, and now what follows, this is where I want you to see if you think Jacob is being deceptive, maybe telling little white lies, maybe not wanting to go with his brother, but wanting his brother to think that he wants to go with him. So see what you think about Yaakov's response here. Jacob said to him, my Lord, Adoni, my Lord knows that the children are weak. Now, one of the reasons I have suspicions about this is they have just traveled, how many miles would it be? 150 miles, 200 miles from Haran, escaping a pursuing Laban, so probably traveling hard and fast, with children and flocks and herds and everything. Although it is, there are nursing here with me, so it may be that the flocks and herds have recently had little ones, and that the nursing, they need to be given some time to nurse their little ones until the little ones can travel. Maybe the same with, the humans. Who knows how old Yosef is at this point? We could probably calculate it. But I think he's 17 years old when he goes to Egypt. So that's some ways down the road. So yeah, Yosef is probably just a little tyke. And if the men should drive them hard one day, all the flock will die. So maybe that's true and maybe it isn't. It does sound to me like an excuse. And I mean, traditionally, as I've read this story, I've just, I've put the worst possible interpretation on Yaakov's words and, said to myself, well, that proves he's a dirty rat. Unless he's not a dirty rat and he's telling the truth. And who knows? So maybe Yaakov is not such a bad guy, or maybe he is. You have to decide. Verse 14, please let my Lord go on ahead before his servant. So Esau, go on ahead before me. And I will lead on slowly at a pace which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure, until I come to my Lord in Seir, Mount Seir. So Yaakov thinks that's where Esau wants him to go. And he gives the idea that he's planning to end up in Seir. Well, he doesn't, but maybe he intended to. He does say at the beginning of this conversation, it's like everybody knows that, pushing children and newborn animals at this stage in their lives can be deadly to them. So maybe everybody did know that, and maybe Yaakov is telling the truth. I still suspect a little bit that he wants to separate himself as much as he can from Esau. And this is one of the one of the consequences of being a dirty rat. If you are a dirty rat, you're always kind of paranoid, thinking people are going to want to get back at you for being the dirty rat that you are. Unless you're not, and then you don't have that problem. So verse 15. And Esau said, "Now let me leave with you some of the people who are with me, some of the 400." But he said, Yaakov said, "What need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord." So here again, he wants some chen. Don't leave your folks with me. This may be an indication that Esau doesn't trust that his little brother is going to want to come to Seir and be with him. And so he's going to send some of his own guys. He's going to leave some of his own guys with Yaakov's family. And, they will be the truth tellers in this. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. And Yaakov journeyed to Sukkot and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. What would that be? Kind of like corrals or something like that for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Sukkot. I'm going to want to go back to the map briefly and look at these places. On the map, I intended to do this when we were going through the PowerPoint stuff, and I didn't. So, we talked about Mitzpah and Peniel. We talked about Machanaim, which means two camps in Hebrew. Now, where is Sukkot? It's up the river here. So Mount Seir is down here at the bottom of the map. Here's Edom in parentheses, Mount Seir. That's where Asaph wants him to go. He goes over this way, and he sounds like he builds a house at Sukkot. The other place that he is going to kind of settle down is over here at Shechem. So this seems to be the territory that Yaakov is interested in settling down there. So he journeyed to Sukkot, and he built himself a house. Now, Dake makes a point of the fact that Jacob built Sukkot on the east of the Jordan, near the river Yavok, which flows into Jordan from the east. He built a house. First reference to a house in connection with the patriarchs, it could refer to temporary quarters. What I'll say about that is, when we have the story of Abraham and Yitzhak, they are like wandering nomads, taking their livestock from place to place. And I think that's mainly because they lived in the southern regions of the Promised Land, down near the Dead Sea. And the greenery in that part of the country is very scarce. So if you live like in southern Israel and around the hills of Judea, there's not much pasture land, and if you have your flocks in one place very long, there won't be anything for them to eat. So they're constantly on the move. On the other hand, up in Haran, that seems to be a homestead that's surrounded by pasture land, but it's very green up there. I mean, even if you're up in the region of Galilee and the Golan Heights, it's very green up there. In fact, it's lush. And so if you are a shepherd up there, you don't have to be wandering around from place to place. You can kind of stay in one place. So up in Haran, they operated out of houses surrounded by pasture lands owned by the family. In the northern regions of Israel, kind of the same thing. Ranchers and shepherds would build homes, and they would be fine. But further down south, now up around Sukkot and Shechem, it's more green up there. So he would be able to build a house there and not just wander from place to place in tents. And in fact, Sukkot means tent. Um, but it's called that because of the booths, the Sukkot. See, the word booth in the Hebrew is Sukkot, and the name of the place is Sukkot, with just an added vav here in the middle of the word, but it's the same word, and it means it's the booths that he made for his livestock, not the house that he lived in. And down south, a shepherd would not make booths for his sheep. What he might do is kind of build a stone wall with the local stones that are available and make sort of a fence around where he keeps his flocks. But he's going to be moving soon. He's not going to he's not going to want to have built booths there. So enough about shepherding, I guess. Enough about livestock. Verse 18, then Yaakov came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. When he came from Padan Aram, that's in Haran, up there in Syria, and he pitched a tent before the city. Now, that doesn't mean he has to, because he's going to be a wandering shepherd, but it's because he built his house and his booths in Sukkot. Now he's moving to a different place. So he pitched his tent before the city, in close proximity. And he bought a parcel of land. Shepherds don't necessarily do that. So he's probably buying a parcel of land so he can build a permanent structure there to live in. So he bought a parcel of land where he'd pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Kesita. I don't know what that word means. Evidently, it's a Hebrew word for some kind of money. It's not silver, kesef. It's not gold, zahav. So kasita is some kind of money. Dake speculates, about what this is. He says if it's silver, then it's like $2.50 per per measure, I guess. 100 pieces of my casita. So he speculates that this land costs $250 in today's money. I don't put much stock in that because we don't know what kind of money this was. So we don't know how much 100 pieces of that kind of money would be. It might be a local, kind of a currency or whatever. But he buys some land there. Now, remember these names, Hamor and Shechem or Shechem. Hamor and Shechem. The meaning of these names is interesting because a Hamor is a donkey and Shechem is like your shoulders. So who knows what those names are? I mean, these are Canaanite guys, so they may not be going by the Hebrew meaning of their names, but they will play a large role in the story as we continue. So remember Hamor and Shechem. Then he erected an altar there. So a place of worship, which would be a big pile of stones, where he can build a fire on top of it and offer animal sacrifices to his God, whom he calls El Elohe Israel. So El is highlighted down here. El is a shortened form of Elohim. Elohe is a unique form. It's not unique. It's a typical form of Elohim, which is a plural word. So we would expect this word to be spelled Aleph, Lamed, He, Yod, Mem. The Yod, Mem ending is the plural ending. That's Elohim. That's the way we usually see this name. But if you want to make this a construct, which would be the God of someone or something, then the mem drops out. The Hirek is lengthened to a Sere, and then you have the God of Israel. Now, in this context, the God of Israel means the God of Yaakov, whose name was changed to Israel. So it's just saying he built an altar to his God. But eventually, throughout the Bible, El Elohe Israel means the God of the whole family, which will eventually become a whole nation and continues as a nation today. So El Elohe Israel, El, the God of Israel. And that brings us to the end of the chapter. And this is one of the few times that Dinah, the daughter of Yaakov, is going to be mentioned in the next chapter. And look here in the second verse, we have Shechem and Hamor. So they're going to be key players in this next episode. So yeah, let me give you a New Testament blessing today. The grace of our Lord Yeshua HaMashiach and the love of God, and the communion or the fellowship of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, be with you all. And I hope we will see you for our study of chapter 34.